Resuming debate, the honourable member for Welland.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for his clarification on farmers' privilege being beyond a year, but then of course there's an end royalty, as he's pointed out. So it's not much different than if there was at the end of a year, because you're going to pay a royalty anyhow. So it would seem that one is going to end up paying to folks regardless. Now, clearly, the UPOV 91, as it suggests, was actually a treaty that was negotiated in 1991. Speaker, when we refer to 78, that was 1978. So yeah, it's a long time ago since UPOV 91 was actually looked at in the sense of a treaty. And of course, it's as you look from place to place, there's differences in what they've done. There's some exemptions built in certain countries that aren't in others. So it's not holistic across the board in the sense that whatever they decided in 1991, they do in Australia, or they do in Germany, or they do in France, or the UK, or the United States, or a number of other places that actually enacted it. And clearly, at some point in time in the early 2000s, when our friends down the end, the Liberals were in power, there was an attempt then, Mr. Speaker, to actually see if they could get it enacted. And it, of course, farmers at that time weren't pleased with it, and because they had a lot of questions concerning it. And so what happened was the government backed away, and here we are in 2014 still looking basically at UPOV 91 and whether indeed it should go forward. And clearly, based on the minister's comments and the bill itself, and the minister's earlier comments outside of this place, their intent is to actually get this done by August of this year and actually get it enacted, based on their belief that there's some science here and there's some innovation that will happen if this comes into force, because then, of course, that means there's a charge somewhere, because someone actually doesn't do this work unless, of course, they get paid for it. Now, I'm not suggesting folks should do it for free in the private sector. That's not actually what they do. They're in the business of making a profit for their shareholders or the owners of their company if it's privately held. Not a bad thing. I mean, that's kind of how business survives. And if you actually work for a company, you want them to survive, because if they're not making any money, they can't actually pay you, Mr. Speaker. That's kind of the nature of the way business is. But ultimately, that means that the customer actually pays for that, because they don't do it for free. They don't do it out of the goodness of their heart. They don't do it for public good. They simply do it because they see that there's potentially a market, and perhaps they can win over that market, charge whatever the price may be. It could be up, it could be sideways, it could be, it might be lower, depending. It could be a number of things. And that means, who's the market? Well, it won't be me, Mr. Speaker, that's for sure. I don't know about you, sir, but I don't farm. And so it doesn't matter if I do live in the country. The piece that I own takes care of itself. I don't actually plant anything of any significance. And so it won't be me actually paying that. Well, it could be down at the end, because I'm the retail customer at the far end, and maybe that's where the price will slide itself along. But clearly, farmers will pay for this innovation. And in some cases, farmers might say, these new innovations are worth paying for. In fact, many farmers are in checkout programs to get into innovation and new technologies and to do different things, and happily so, because they actually want to continue to enhance their ability to grow better crops, if you will, better quality crops, more of them on a smaller land use, that are more drought resistant, that are more drought tolerant, that use less water, that use less inputs, and because clearly inputs are a cost to farmers. So all of those things they're keenly aware of and interested in doing. And many farmers, in fact, I would suggest all farmers, are involved in some form of agronomics, in the sense of saying, how can I do this better? Whether it be looking at their rotation, or looking at what they do, or looking at the market, and trying to find out and trying to actually work with their land and their inputs and their ability to actually do things in a better way. And so there are questions about UPOV 91, because I mean it has been, and I've been around for a while, but it's been kind of on the back burner for a long period of time. As the minister says in UPOV 78, and he's correct when he says it doesn't speak of farmers' privilege or farmers save seed, because it's totally silent. Doesn't say a word. So therefore, farmers go ahead and do it. They save seed. They just save it. Because it's silent, doesn't say they can't, doesn't lay out a prescription as to how you can. So since it says nothing, it's assumed that you just can. So that's what farmers have been doing for millennia, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker. That's long before the seed companies came along. It was farmers who were really their own seed company. And many are to this day. In a way, they vary, they buy some, they save some, they do a number of different things. But what they don't always do is they don't always have to, in certain cases, there are hybrids, of course, that you have to pay for year in, year out. And there are other varieties, the things that you do have to pay for. There's no question, farmers say that's a legitimate thing I have to do. But they don't see it when they save it. They see this as an adjunct piece of why can't I continue to do that? And I think the minister was fairly clear, and I certainly will go back and look at the record when it's printed, Mr. Speaker, but I believe what he said was, you can save it for more than a year, but you're going to pay an end-use royalty on it. So you're going to pay anyways. So whether you save it or not, you're going to pay. So you could basically not save it and pay, or you can go to the trouble of saving it, which means you're going to condition it or get it conditioned and get it ready for you to use in your field, and then when you harvest it, you're going to pay something at the end. Now, the dilemma is, I had a quick look at page 7 and section 5. It doesn't say anything there about as to what it will be. What will that end-use royalty actually be? Will it be greater than if I simply bought the seed and didn't save it in the first place? Is that going to be the piece that's the regulation that we wait for and then we find out after? Or is that going to be a negotiated piece between the companies and farmers? Would that be individual farmers? Would it be farming associations? Could it be the grain growers group or whoever else? The oats or barley groups, would it be them? Would it be individuals? Would they pit farmer against farmer? Would royalty, end-use royalty be higher here and lower there depending on the deal you can cut? That's an open question, it seems, based on at least what I can see in page 7 that the minister pointed us to, and I want to thank the minister for, through you, Mr. Speaker, for actually pointing us to that clarification there, but I actually don't see that laid out in front of us. So clearly there are a lot of open questions on 91 for a lot of farmers, and I think legitimately so, as to why we're rushing headlong at this. Now, some will say, well, it's been there for a long time, but it's been silent for a long time, and I think a lot of folks need to get back up to speed, Mr. Speaker, around. I know the minister will say to me, well, you've got opportunity through committee, and so I would hope that we would have that opportunity through committee in the sense of we would take the time to actually do a couple of things. One is investigate what's happened, and I welcome, through you, Mr. Speaker, the minister's offer that as long as we don't tear it apart and pull things out of it, he'd be happy to take suggestions that might be helpful. I would apologize to you in advance for being a little skeptical, Mr. Speaker, because I know through you that you weren't the one who was the skeptic, but I am, based on my previous experiences in the Agriculture Committee where I actually had proposed some changes that I thought didn't actually take things out of the bill because I didn't strip anything out of the bill. I actually was adding things I thought would be helpful to the Food Safety Act bill and what have you. And, of course, we didn't actually get any. So as much as there were, I think, from the opposition benches, I think 14 or 15 potential amendments that could have enhanced it, we didn't actually get any. So you'll have to excuse me, Mr. Speaker, for just being a teeny-weeny bit skeptical about the statement of the minister when it comes to, well, my arms are open. If you've got good ideas, feel free to send them our way, and we'll take them under advisement and make the bill better. I just don't have any experience around that in this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and I apologize to you in advance because I know it's not something you would do. You would be more than welcoming to make sure that legislation is as good as we can possibly make it coming out of this place, because that's what really we should be about as legislators. So, I mean, clearly we're looking at a bill that, for some in the farm community, without question, because I've talked to a number, are saying, hey, it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. And they're saying to me, they think it's there's nothing wrong with it. And then we have others on the other side. I know that the other side quite often wants to point at one group or another. But quite frankly, I'm talking to individual farmers who are non-affiliated, who are not saying I'm with this group or with that group. And some folks would be surprised if, when they find out that some of the individual farmers are from groups that the other side actually calls as witnesses all the time. They're saying, we should maybe think about this for a while because we're not really sure how it's going to actually weave itself together. We're told we get a privilege. But what privilege is it? Is it really a privilege, or is it just you can store it but you're going to pay for it? And so you end up being the storer, and the person who initially sold it to you collects money at the end of the day. Some will say, well, it's not a bad deal. And some will say it's not a particularly good one. So I think that's problematic, and I think it's something we need to look at very carefully. The other issues, obviously, there's a number of them through the Act that are changes. There's a number of things that, as to whether it be the Fertilizer Act, the Seeds Act, advanced payments. There's a number of pieces in there. And one of the pieces that's always contentious for us, Mr. Speaker, is the sense that we'll not do it through the legislative process. We actually now hand it over as a regulatory process. And so once we hand that over, now that's gone. So there's pieces where there's good pieces in the legislation that talk about the health and safety of handling of fertilizers, making sure that it's done well. Those are good things. We would approve of those things. We think they're good. But then in the next breath, the government then goes on to say, well, but from now on, we'll do the changes through a regulatory change. We won't bother having to bring it back because through this legislation, we'll take all of that responsibility back and hand it basically to the minister, whomever the minister happens to be. It may not be this particular minister, maybe somebody else down the road. Those are always difficult things. There are some things that can be done regulatory because the changes have such a minimal impact, need to be done quickly, you can get that done. But in these particular cases, these are large pieces. And now we're talking about turning over large authority, a large responsibility, a large amount of authority to the minister. And, we've noticed on this side that quite often as they bring these sort of pieces, I know the minister disagrees that this is an omnibus bill, but when you actually look at C-18, and I would remind this House, there's more legislation being done in the agriculture field than in recent memory. I don't know, my colleague from Malpeque may be able to help me with this, but it seems to me that we've done more agriculture legislation in this Parliament than probably the last 10 parliaments combined as far as changing actual legislation, which have significant impacts on farmers right across the board. And so for this particular piece, to then turn over in the future changes that should be done through a legislative process, just done in a regulatory process, isn't reassuring for me as the critic, to be honest, in the sense of that somehow things won't happen later on. As the minister said, well, we can then, under questioning, he said, well, we can change things through regulation, well, including the effects on farmers' privilege. They can actually change that through regulation based on what happens here. So what then happens? The minister said, well, we can enhance it. The problem with the two-headed coin is you flip it, you get the other side of it. It might be another head or it could be the tail, which means the advancement you talked about you might have done could be a takeaway on the other side. There's no sense that should happen. There's no sense that it will happen. The problem is the potential is there for it to happen. And if you give the potential in the wrong hand, it then ends up affecting those who get things taken away from them. So clearly, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of things in here that we would probably say are good pieces of legislation, and we would like to tweak them a little bit. We could let them go. But clearly, it's as an omnibus piece, we need to study it extremely carefully, because if we're not going to study it carefully and we're not actually going to be open to helping make it better legislation, then we'll end up with what I think we can debate the merits of the demise of the Canadian Wheat Board, and whether it was right or it was wrong on a philosophical basis. One of the things we can't, in my view, underscore enough is that when the Wheat Board went and the logistics piece went with it, we see what happens in the rail system and the backlog that's on the prairies, where we have the Premier of Saskatchewan and the Agriculture Minister in Alberta, and in fact last week at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, where we see the President of the Alberta Federation of Agriculture stand up and ask me a question and say, I want you to stop talking about regulation. I want you to actually regulate those railroads to make sure we can move our crops off the prairies. That, indeed, is an opportunity for the government to act under the regulations. They don't have to bring it here. That would be an appropriate use of regulations, where they actually get the big stick out of regulations and they make things happen. So we would actually get product off the prairies. Conservative estimates, Mr. Speaker, are between $2 to $4 billion is stranded out there to farmers, which affects part of this legislation when it talks about advance payments programs. Because in here it's talking about how we're going to do this and streamline it if you want multiple years. In other words, you're back-to-back. Well, this year, farmers are going to be back-to-back because many of them took the advance loans last year. And the minister's already on the record as saying, well, we know there's a problem. We know you haven't sold your crop and you have no money because, of course, there's no wheat pool to send it to. There's no wheat board to send it to. So basically, you're waiting for an elevator to clear its grain so you can get into an elevator if you're not where you can get to a producer car. And so what happens is you end up, they're not empty, you can't get in, you don't get paid, Mr. Speaker. So the government's response is, get another loan. So you're getting a loan to pay a loan to then start this year with a loan without selling any grain. And there's some of the estimates we're talking about, the carryout could be 2 years. In other words, grain that was grown last year, Mr. Speaker, may actually not hit market until 2 years from now. If that's the case, the price that it was worth last year will not be the price it's worth in the future because it will be worth less, because its optimum quality will diminish over time, and you'll end up with less money for it than you would have gotten last year, which will impact your ability to pay back the loan, clearly because it's of less value. The loan was based on what's the value in your bin. That's today, of course. If you don't sell the remainder of it for 2 years and you sell it for feed versus it used to be premium quality wheat with a great protein, you're now stuck selling it for a heck of a lot less. In fact, today, the prices are running between 12 and 15% less than they were last fall. And of course, those who had contracts, if they didn't move, they don't fill the contract anyways. So clearly, this legislation is talking about advance payments and those loan programs. But this seems as if it's become a cover for a lot of things that happened in growing forward to last year, and my friend from Malpeck referenced it, I think, in his questions, what we call the suite of programs called business risk management programming, where the government actually take out hundreds of billions of dollars worth of money. Yes, they'll say, well, hang on, the supplemental estimates will come, just wait. Problem is farmers really can't wait. The dilemma is what you've got is a program. Yes, there was difficulties in business risk management programming, Mr. Speaker, no question about that. The issue was, do you fix the programming or gut the program? In my view, they gutted the program. I've talked to farmers who are saying, what's the sense of being in the program? The program ends up not doing what it's supposed to do, and quite frankly, I won't qualify for some of them anyway, so what the heck? They moved the base down to such a level that I wouldn't qualify for the program, so at the end of the day, I don't get any money. But I really want that program, but the problem is I got to take this program with this program because that's the way they're bundled together, and so therefore I end up on the short end of the stick, so why would I bother doing that? So clearly, Mr. Speaker, we see some sticking points in this legislation for sure. UPOV 91 for many farmers is a major issue that they want to see resolved. And they don't wish to give up. Many of them don't wish to give up. What they now see is their inherent right to save seed that they've done, as I said earlier, for millennia. If you think about how farmers do it, in fact, most folks in the city would just assume that that's how farmers actually do it. Now, I recognize that that's not how it really happens. There are seed companies that farmers buy from on a regular basis, canola being one of them, and there's others, of course, that some farmers would prefer to buy rather than save seed. They prefer to get it every year. That's a choice they make. The difficulty here is a lot of farmers see that perhaps I will lose the choice. So there are ways for innovation to happen, and one of the things we do know that needs to happen is obviously they need to get paid because they're not actually going to do the work without being paid. And I think that's appropriate. So there are royalty schemes that would say if you want to participate as a broader group, perhaps that's how you do it. There are checkoffs in canola. There are checkoffs in other programs and for other commodity groups and for other livestock groups that do different things as the money gets in there. But one of the things that's missing in all of this, Mr. Speaker, is actually where's the public dollars in all of this and the public research? This government, the Canadian government, not this government, the Conservative government, this government in this country, under lots of different administrations, was world-renowned for the type of work that it used to do in innovation and indeed do in basic public research for the agriculture sector. That's a piece that's missing in here, Mr. Speaker. We'd like to see that actually find its way back in, so those public dollars go back into the public good and go back to farmers, because that's the way how to make it profitable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.